When my daughter Sarah screamed at me that I should have died instead of her father, I never imagined those words would be the first step toward the complete destruction of her own life. What she didn't know is that I had already started investigating her true intentions 3 months before my husband Michael passed away. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell because we publish new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what city and country you're watching from. My name is Emily Montoya. I'm 72 years old, and for 43 years, I lived the most beautiful marriage a woman could ever wish for with Michael Vega. But this story doesn't begin with his death. It begins with the exact moment I discovered my own daughter was waiting for her father to die to solve her financial problems. It was June 15, 2023, when Dr. Michael Ortega gave us the news that would change our lives forever. Michael had advanced pancreatic cancer. I remember his words perfectly. "Mrs. Montoya, I'm sorry to inform you that the tumor is inoperable. He has between 6 and 12 months to live." Michael took my hand with that strength that always defined him and said to me, "Emily, I want to live these last months in peace, in our house, surrounded by the people I love. I don't want treatments that only prolong my suffering." But Sarah, our only daughter, had other plans. That same afternoon when we returned to our home on Maple Avenue, she had already researched private clinics in Switzerland offering experimental treatments for $200,000. "Mom, you can't just give up like that," she yelled at me with tears in her eyes. "Dad can be saved if we try this treatment. Dr. Klaus Weber at the Zurich clinic has a 30% success rate." I looked at Michael, who gently shook his head. "Sarah, my love," my husband said to her, "I've lived 69 wonderful years. I want my last months to be about quality of life, not being hooked up to machines in a foreign country." But my daughter insisted day after day, "How can you be so selfish, Mom? You have the money to save him and you're not doing it." That sentence hurt me deeply, but what really set off alarm bells was something I overheard by chance on August 10, 2023. Sarah was talking on the phone with her husband, Daniel Castillo, in our backyard. She thought I was taking a nap, but I had gotten up to get some water. "Daniel, if Dad dies soon, Mom will inherit everything, and then we will. With that money, we can save the business," my daughter whispered. "But if we spend $200,000 on that treatment and Dad dies anyway, we'll be left with nothing." I felt like a dagger had pierced my heart. My own daughter was calculating her father's death in financial terms. I couldn't sleep that night. Michael noticed my restlessness. "What's worrying you, my love?" he asked, caressing my face. I didn't tell him what I had heard. I didn't want his last months to be tainted by such a betrayal, but I decided I needed to protect him and myself. The next day, without telling anyone, I hired a private investigator, Daniel Ruiz. I asked him to discreetly investigate Sarah and Daniel's financial situation. What I discovered in the following weeks confirmed my worst suspicions. Daniel had an electronics import business that was bankrupt. He owed $300,000 to various suppliers and banks. Castillo Imports LLC was on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. Over the following months, I watched as Sarah visited her father with a two-faced act that turned my stomach. On one hand, she acted like the loving, devoted daughter. On the other, I could see her mentally calculating every day that Michael was still alive. On December 20th, 2023, Michael had a severe relapse. We took him to the University of Chicago Medical Center, where Dr. Ortega confirmed it was a matter of weeks. Sarah cried uncontrollably, but I saw something different in her eyes. Relief. That night, while Michael slept under sedation, Sarah approached me in the hospital hallway. "Mom, when this is over, I want you to know you can always count on me," she said, hugging me. "Daniel and I will take care of you." How ironic. The same person who had been waiting for her father's death to inherit was now promising to care for me, a care I neither needed nor wanted from her. Michael's last 3 months were a mix of beautiful moments and painful observations. Every time my husband had a bad day, I saw a small smile on Sarah's lips. Every time Michael improved temporarily, my daughter would get nervous. But I kept documenting everything, saving every suspicious conversation, every calculated gesture, because something inside me told me that the real betrayal was yet to come, and I was right. The last days of January 2024 were the most intense of my life. Michael was visibly weakening, but he maintained that serene dignity that I had always loved. However, it was precisely during those weeks that I began to notice strange behaviors from Sarah that put me on high alert. On February 3rd, while I was with Michael at a palliative chemotherapy session, Sarah stayed at home, supposedly to clean and organize. When we returned, I found papers shuffled on Michael's desk, bank documents, insurance policies, property deeds. Everything had been moved from its original place. "Sarah, have you been going through these documents?" I asked her directly. She got nervous, fidgeting with her hands like she did as a child when she was lying. "I just wanted to help organize, Mom. Dad has so many important papers." Michael, from his armchair, looked at her with a strange expression. "Honey, those documents are perfectly organized in my files. They didn't need organizing." That's when I decided to speed up my own investigation. The next day, I contacted Daniel Ruiz, my private investigator, and asked for a full report on Sarah and Daniel's activities. What he discovered surpassed my worst expectations. Daniel not only owed $300,000, but he had been using our family name to get additional credit. There were 3 more loans totaling $150,000, guaranteed with the promise of a substantial upcoming family inheritance. But the most disturbing part came later. Daniel had followed Sarah for a week and documented something that chilled me to the bone. My daughter had visited 5 different law firms, consulting on inheritance procedures in cases of terminal illness and the legal timelines for transferring assets after death. On February 15th, Michael had a respiratory crisis that forced us to hospitalize him again. During the 3 days he was admitted, something extraordinary happened that completely opened my eyes. Sarah arrived at the hospital with a folder full of forms. "Mom, Dr. Fernandez asked me to have Dad sign these documents to speed up his treatment," she said with complete nonchalance. I reviewed the papers and my heart stopped. They weren't medical forms. They were bank transfer documents, authorizations for account access, and worst of all, a power of attorney that would give Sarah total control over Michael's assets in case of temporary or permanent incapacitation. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice calm, "these are not medical documents. These are very specific legal papers." Her face changed completely. The mask of the worried daughter fell for an instant, and I saw something I had never seen in her before: calculating coldness. "Mom, I want to be prepared to help in case Dad can't make decisions," she replied, but her voice trembled. "Help who, exactly?" I asked her directly. She didn't answer. She just put the documents away and left the room. That night, while Michael slept sedated after the crisis, I made a decision that would change everything. I took out my phone and recorded a message for my husband, explaining everything I had discovered about our daughter. I wouldn't show it to him while he was alive, but I needed my knowledge of the situation to be on record. I also discreetly contacted our family lawyer, David Navarro, to schedule an urgent appointment. I explained the situation to him over the phone, and he advised me to act with extreme caution. "Mrs. Montoya," David said, "what you're telling me is legally very serious. If your daughter is trying to obtain fraudulent documents while your husband is vulnerable, we could be talking about aggravated fraud." On February 28th, Michael returned home, but his condition was delicate. The doctors gave us a prognosis of 2 weeks, a month at most. Sarah intensified her visits, but I now saw every gesture, every word, every look with a completely different perspective. One day I found her whispering on the phone on the balcony. "No, Daniel, we can't wait any longer. The creditors are going to seize the company next week. We need this to be resolved quickly." When she saw me, she hung up immediately. It was Dad's doctor," she lied shamelessly. But I was no longer the naive mother who blindly believed in her daughter. I was a woman who had learned to protect the man I loved and to protect myself. During the first week of March, as Michael entered his final days, Sarah began asking more and more direct questions about wills, bank accounts, and properties. She even suggested that Michael should get everything in order to avoid problems for us later. On March 10th, Michael called me over when we were alone. His voice was weak, but his mind was still completely lucid. "Emily, I've noticed strange things about Sarah," he whispered. "Yesterday she tried to get me to sign some papers when you weren't here. She said they were for the hospital, but they looked like bank documents." My heart shattered. Michael had started to realize his own daughter's betrayal. "Don't worry, my love," I replied, kissing his forehead. "I will take care of everything." But inside, I was already planning how to respond to this betrayal in the most decisive way possible. On the night of March 14th, Michael fell into a coma. Sarah cried uncontrollably, but I saw her checking her watch constantly, as if she were calculating the time. The next day, on March 15th, 2024, Michael passed away at 6 inches the morning, and just 2 hours later, my daughter showed me exactly who she really was. March 15th, 2024, will be etched in my memory as the day I lost my husband and discovered my daughter's true face. Michael took his last breath at 4 inches the morning, surrounded by the sacred silence that the end of a full life deserves. I held his hand until it grew cold. Sarah had arrived at the hospital an hour earlier, as if she had sensed the final moment was approaching. She cried genuinely when Michael closed his eyes forever, and for a moment I thought maybe I had misjudged my daughter. Maybe the pain and financial desperation had led her to act strangely, but deep down she was still the little girl I had raised with so much love. How wrong I was. As soon as we finished the hospital procedures, Sarah approached me with an expression I had never seen on her face. Her eyes, which moments before had shed tears for her father, now shone with a coldness that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom, we need to talk about the funeral arrangements," she said in a controlled, almost businesslike voice. "I've been thinking about what Dad would have wanted." Her words seemed strange, but I attributed her tone to the different ways people process grief. I told her we could discuss everything at home, that we first needed to rest and absorb the loss. But Sarah had other plans. "No, Mom, we need to organize it now. I've already contacted the Eternal Peace Funeral Home on Michigan Avenue. They have an opening for the day after tomorrow, March 17th. I was surprised she had made these arrangements so quickly, but again, I thought maybe it was her way of keeping busy to avoid the pain. What happened next changed my perception of the limits of human cruelty forever. That same afternoon, while I was trying to process my loss in the solitude of our home, Sarah arrived with Daniel and presented me with a detailed list of funeral arrangements. "Mom, I've decided the viewing should be private, just for close family," she began to explain. Dad was a reserved person and wouldn't have liked a huge funeral. That was completely false. Michael was loved by dozens of friends, neighbors, and relatives who deserved to say goodbye to him, but before I could object, Sarah continued. "I also think you should consider not attending the religious service," she said, looking me directly in the eyes. "Excuse me?" I replied, thinking I had misheard. "You're very distraught, Mom. You might cause an emotional scene that would make the guests uncomfortable. It would be better if you stayed home and rested." Daniel nodded in support of his wife. "Mrs. Montoya, Sarah is right. You're very vulnerable right now. It's not a good idea for you to expose yourself to all that emotional pressure." I felt as if I had stepped into a nightmare. My own daughter was suggesting I not attend the funeral of my husband of 43 years, the man with whom I had shared every day of my adult life, every dream, every project. "Sarah," I said, controlling my voice, "Michael was my husband. I have the right and the duty to be present at his farewell." She exchanged a strange look with Daniel before answering. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. The stress of a public funeral could affect your health." That night, after they left, I called our parish priest, Father Antonio Jimenez, to confirm the details of the religious service. What he told me confirmed that something very sinister was happening. "Mrs. Montoya, your daughter came to see me this afternoon," the priest informed me. "She asked me to officiate a private mass just for her and her immediate family. She said you were too ill to attend." "Father Antonio," I replied, "I am perfectly fine, and I want to be present at my husband's farewell." There was an awkward silence before he responded. "Of course, Mrs. Montoya, but your daughter was very insistent. She even mentioned they might need extra security." "Extra security? Why would they need security at Michael's funeral?" The answer came on the morning of March 17th. I dressed in my best black suit, the same one I had worn at our wedding 43 years ago. I took Michael's favorite flowers, white daisies, and headed to the Eternal Peace Funeral Home with a broken heart, but determined to say a dignified farewell to the love of my life. When I arrived at 10 in the morning, I found something I never would have imagined possible. 2 large men dressed in black were standing at the main entrance. Seeing me approach, one of them walked toward me. "Are you Emily Montoya?" he asked in a professional tone. "Yes, I'm Michael's wife. I've come to say goodbye to my husband." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I have specific instructions not to allow you access." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Instructions from whom? From Sarah Montoya. She is the one who hired our services." At that moment, I saw Sarah come out of the funeral home. She walked straight toward me with a look of determination I had never seen in her. "Mom, I told you not to come," she said, showing not an ounce of compassion. "Sarah, I'm Michael's widow. I have a right to be here." "No," she replied with a coldness that cut through my soul. "It's your fault that Dad is dead. If you had agreed to the treatment in Switzerland, he would still be alive." People entering and leaving the funeral home began to stop, creating a circle of curious onlookers around us. "Sarah, please, don't do this," I begged. "I just want to say goodbye to your father." But she moved closer to me, and in a voice loud enough for everyone present to hear, she uttered the words that forever destroyed any family bond between us. "You should be dead instead of Dad. You killed him with your selfishness. You don't deserve to be here." The silence that followed was deafening. Dozens of people stared at us with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. The guards moved closer to me, awaiting orders. "Get her out of here," Sarah commanded. "I don't want to see her ever again." The two guards approached me with mechanical, professional movements. One took my left arm, while the other positioned himself on my right. I held tightly to the bouquet of white daisies, refusing to let them go even in the midst of this devastating humiliation. "Please, ma'am, come with us," the taller of the two said, with a cold courtesy that made the situation even more surreal. As they physically moved me away from the entrance, I began to scream Michael's name. It wasn't a planned reaction, but something instinctive, desperate. "Michael! Michael! I can't say goodbye to you!" My voice echoed down Michigan Avenue. Passers-by stopped, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. An elderly woman began to cry as she witnessed my pain. A middle-aged man approached one of the guards. "What's going on here? Why won't you let this lady pass?" he asked, outraged. Sarah responded in a controlled voice, acting as if she were the victim. "It's my mother. She's very distraught over my father's passing. The doctor recommended she not attend the funeral due to her mental state." That lie pierced me like a dagger. Not only had she forbidden me from saying goodbye to Michael, but now she was inventing fake medical diagnoses to justify her cruelty to strangers. "That's a lie," I shouted as the guards pushed me toward the sidewalk. "I'm his wife. We were married for 43 years. But the murmurs of the crowd began to split. Some looked at me with compassion, others with suspicion. The narrative Sarah had built was simple and effective. An unstable widow who needed to be protected from herself. The guards finally let me go when we were a considerable distance from the funeral home. "Ma'am, please, go home," one of them said with a hint of compassion in his voice. "We don't want to call the police." I stood on the sidewalk, holding Michael's daisies, watching as people entered and exited the place where the body of the man I had loved my entire adult life lay. It was like living a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. But in the midst of that emotional devastation, something inside me began to change. The initial shock gave way to a mental clarity I hadn't felt in months. As I walked slowly to my car, I took out my cell phone and began to do something that would prove crucial in the coming days. I recorded an audio message to myself, documenting exactly what had just happened. The date, the time, the names of witnesses I had identified, the exact words Sarah had spoken. Every detail was recorded in my trembling, but determined, voice. On the way home, my phone began to ring incessantly. It was as if the entire city had witnessed what happened and wanted to express their outrage or support. The first call was from Linda Delgado, our lifelong neighbor. "Emily, I just heard what happened at the funeral home. What Sarah did to you is inhuman. Michael must be turning in his grave." Then, David Serrano, Michael's brother, called. "Emily, I don't understand anything. Sarah told me you were hospitalized. I came all the way from Florida for the funeral and I walk into this spectacle." One after another, the calls kept coming. Friends, relatives, acquaintances, all expressing their horror at what they had witnessed or heard. By the end of the afternoon, my phone showed 66 missed calls, but 3 conversations were particularly revealing. The first was with Sarah Vega, Michael's younger sister. "Emily, Sarah called me an hour ago saying you had a psychotic episode and that the doctors recommended you be committed. Is that true?" "Sarah," I replied, "I am perfectly sane. Your brother died yesterday, and today I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to him. That's the only thing that has happened." There was a long silence before she responded. "Emily, this isn't normal. Sarah is making up contradictory stories. She told Aunt Mercedes that you had threatened to harm the funeral attendees. The second crucial call came from David Moreno, our trusted accountant for 20 years. Mrs. Montoya, I'm very sorry for your loss, but I need to inform you of something urgent. Your daughter came to my office this morning with documents she claims you signed, authorizing her to access your husband's bank accounts. My blood ran cold. David, I haven't signed any documents of that kind. I thought so. The documents looked authentic, but something wasn't right. I told her I needed to confirm with you personally before processing any transaction. The third call was the one that finally confirmed my most terrible suspicions. It was from Daniel Ruiz, my private investigator. Mrs. Montoya, I'm sorry to call you at this time of grief, but there's something you need to know immediately. This morning I followed your daughter after what happened at the funeral home. She went directly to 3 different bank branches with documents she tried to pass off as power of attorney forms signed by you and your husband. What kind of documents? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Authorizations for immediate transfers, requests for access to safety deposit boxes, and petitions to know the exact balances of all family accounts. That night, sitting in the living room of our home where Michael and I had shared so many happy moments, I made the most important decision of my life. I was not going to allow my husband's death to be used by our daughter to enrich herself while I sank into grief and humiliation. Sarah had made a fatal mistake. She had completely underestimated the intelligence and resources of a woman who had helped build a considerable estate through decades of honest work. I opened my phone book and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, but which I knew would be crucial for what I had planned. David Navarro, Law Offices, a professional voice, answered. David, it's Emily Montoya. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent. Of course, Emily. What is it about? It's about protecting Michael's legacy and teaching my daughter that some actions have permanent consequences. The morning of March 18th dawned gray and rainy, as if the sky were crying for Michael. I got up early, not by choice, but because insomnia had been my companion all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look of contempt on Sarah's face when she ordered me thrown out of the funeral. At 8 o'clock sharp, I was sitting in David Navarro's office, a place I had known for 20 years of professional dealings. David, a man of 62 with silver hair and sharp eyes, received me with the solemnity the moment required. Emily, first of all, my sincerest condolences for Michael's passing, he began, shaking my hand firmly. He was an extraordinary man. Thank you, David. But I'm not here just to mourn my loss. I'm here to protect it. I recounted in detail the events of the past few days. Sarah's strange behavior during Michael's illness, the suspicious documents, her consultations with multiple law firms, and finally, the humiliation at the funeral and the immediate attempts to access the bank accounts. David took meticulous notes, his brow furrowing more and more as my story unfolded. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. Emily, what you're describing constitutes several potential crimes: attempted fraud, document forgery, and possibly abuse of a vulnerable person if she had managed to get Michael to sign anything during his illness. What are my options? I asked directly. First, we need to immediately secure all of your and Michael's assets. Second, we must formally document all these fraudulent attempts. And third, he paused dramatically. Third, you can use your legal position as a widow to completely revise the existing will arrangements. That same morning, David and I went to the main branch of Bank of America, where Michael and I kept our primary accounts. What we discovered there confirmed my worst suspicions and surpassed even the most pessimistic expectations. The branch manager, Emily Castaneda, received us in her private office. She was an elegant woman in her 52nd who had known our family for a decade. Mrs. Montoya, I am so sorry for your loss, she began with genuine compassion, but I must inform you of some very concerning incidents that have occurred in the last 48 hours. Emily opened a thick folder on her desk. Your daughter, Sarah, has visited our branch 3 times since yesterday. On the first occasion, she presented documents that supposedly gave her power of attorney over your husband's accounts. And what kind of documents were they? David asked in a professional voice. Apparently, power of attorney forms with Mr. Vega's signature dated the day of his death, Emily replied with obvious discomfort. Per protocol, we refused to process them without further verification. My heart raced. Sarah had tried to forge her father's signature on the very day he died. But there's more, Emily continued. On her second visit, she brought different documents, this time supposed authorizations signed by you, Mrs. Montoya, allowing her access to the family's safety deposit box. Documents I never signed, I stated flatly. I figured as much, which is why I kept copies of everything and contacted our fraud department. David leaned forward. Was there a third visit? Yes, early this morning. Sarah came with a man who introduced himself as the family accountant. They insisted they had a legal right to know all bank movements from the last 6 months on Mr. Vega's accounts. Emily showed us the copies of the forged documents. Even to my untrained eye, Michael's signatures looked like clumsy imitations of his elegant handwriting. But what struck me most was the date. March 15th, 2024, the day he died. Emily, I said, I want you to immediately freeze all accounts associated with Michael and require my personal presence for any transaction related to our assets. Of course, Mrs. Montoya. I've already taken those measures as a precaution. From the bank, we went to the county recorder's office where Michael and I had our properties registered. The family home on Maple Avenue, a condo on the coast we had bought for our retirement, and a small commercial space we rented out as an investment. The registrar, Daniel Vasquez, confirmed something that chilled me to the bone. Mrs. Montoya, yesterday afternoon we received a very specific inquiry about the property deeds registered in Mr. Vega's name. A woman identifying herself as his daughter wanted to know the exact procedure for transferring properties in cases of inheritance. What kind of information did she request? David asked. Legal deadlines, necessary documents, the possibility of immediate transfers, and specifically whether there was any impediment for a direct heir to sell properties before the probate process was fully completed. Sarah wasn't just trying to access our money. She was already planning to sell our properties, probably to pay off Daniel's debts as soon as possible. In the afternoon, Daniel Ruiz, my private investigator, gave me a report that completed the devastating picture of my daughter's betrayal. Mrs. Montoya, he explained in a quiet cafe near my house, I've dug deeper into the activities of your daughter and son-in-law. The situation is worse than we thought. He opened a folder full of photographs and documents. Daniel not only owes $300,000 from his failed business, he also has gambling debts for an additional $120,000 with private lenders. He showed me photos of Daniel entering and leaving illegal betting houses, loan receipts with predatory interest rates, and most disturbingly, a document where he had used our family address as collateral for a $50,000 loan. But the worst part, Daniel continued, is that your daughter and son-in-law have been living in expectation of your inheritance for months. I found WhatsApp messages between them, where they calculate exactly how much money they would get from selling your properties. He showed me screenshots of conversations he had legally obtained through a contact at a phone company. The messages were ruthless in their calculated coldness. Sarah, when Mom dies after Dad, we'll have about $1,200,000, enough to save the business and start over. Daniel, what if your mother doesn't die soon? Sarah, older women don't last long after losing their husbands, and if she lasts too long, we can always manage to get her into a nursing home for mental incompetence. Those words shot through me like bullets. My own daughter had not only wished for my death but had planned to declare me mentally incompetent to seize my assets. That night, alone in my house, I made the decision that would change everything forever. That night of March 18th, I sat at Michael's desk, surrounded by 43 years of shared memories. Photos of our wedding, trips, family celebrations when Sarah was still the loving daughter we had raised, but the images of the past could no longer erase the present reality. My daughter had crossed a line from which there was no return. I opened the will that Michael and I had drafted 5 years ago when we turned 67. It was a simple and generous document. He would inherit everything from me, and when he died, Sarah would receive our entire estate, estimated at $1,300,000 between properties, savings, and investments. What a bitter irony. The same daughter who had calculated my death to get rich was about to discover that her own actions had destroyed that possibility forever. At 9 a.m. On March 19th, exactly 72 hours after Michael's passing, I showed up again at David Navarro's office with a determination I hadn't felt in decades. David, I want to completely change my will, I announced without preamble. Sarah will not receive a single dollar from my estate. My lawyer looked at me with a serious expression. Emily, I understand your pain and anger, but will decisions made in times of great emotional stress can be legally challenged. I recommend you think it over, calmly. I've thought about it all night, I replied, showing him the screenshots Daniel had given me. Read these messages and tell me if my decision seems rash. David read the WhatsApp messages in silence, his expression growing graver by the second. When he finished, he took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Emily, this changes everything. These messages show premeditation and deliberate planning to benefit from your death. Legally, they constitute evidence of hereditary unworthiness. What does that mean exactly? It means that, according to U.S. inheritance law, an heir can be disinherited if they have committed serious acts against the deceased's family. In your case, the forgery attempts, the public humiliation, and these messages where she plans to benefit from your death are more than sufficient grounds. But I had other plans. I didn't just want to exclude Sarah from my inheritance. I wanted something more educational, more impactful. I wanted her to feel exactly what I had felt when she kicked me out of Michael's funeral. David, I don't just want to change my will. I want to create a situation where Sarah understands the consequences of her actions while I'm still alive to see it. I explained my plan, crafted during the sleepless hours of the previous night. My lawyer listened with growing attention, occasionally nodding with professional approval. It's a risky strategy, Emily, but completely legal. However, it will require perfect coordination and precise timing. I have time and resources. Michael taught me to be patient, but Sarah's betrayal has taught me to be relentless. The first step of my plan was executed that same afternoon. David had prepared legal documents that required my personal presence at the bank, accompanied by witnesses, to make specific transfers from my personal accounts. At 3 p.m., Emily Castaneda received us at the bank, along with 2 employees who would act as official witnesses. I proceeded to transfer $500,000 to a separate account that would be inaccessible to any heir for 5 years, designated exclusively for a charitable foundation I would establish in Michael's memory. Another $300,000 I transferred to fixed-term accounts, which would only activate for the educational expenses of my grandchildren, Aiden and Sophie, but only when they turned 25. Sarah would have no access or control over these funds, but the most ingenious part of my strategy was yet to come. At 5 p.m., I went to the offices of Torres Real Estate, the company that managed the rental of our commercial property. The manager, Daniel Torres, had known me for years. Mrs. Montoya, my condolences for your husband. He greeted me with genuine respect. How can I help you? Daniel, I need you to immediately contact all current and potential tenants and inform them that the space will be available for sale in the coming weeks. Are you sure? It's an excellent source of passive income. Completely sure. But here's the important part. I want you to generate very high expectations in the market. Spread the word that it will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Daniel nodded, though he seemed confused by my urgency. On March 20th, exactly as I had calculated, I received the call I was waiting for. Mom, it's Sarah, her voice said on the other end, with a considerably softer tone than the last time. We need to talk. I think there have been terrible misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? I replied with calculated coldness. Yes, Mom. I was very upset by Dad's death. I said things I didn't really feel. The security guards. It was an emotional, wrong decision. Go on. I've been thinking about what Dad would have wanted. He never would have approved of the family being torn apart by a misunderstanding. Sarah was trying to emotionally manipulate me, using Michael's memory as a tool for blackmail. But I was no longer the vulnerable woman I had been 3 days ago. Sarah, have you had any trouble accessing your father's bank accounts? There was a revealing pause before she answered. I haven't tried to access anything, Mom. I just wanted to make sure you were okay financially. Lie after lie. But I needed her to keep believing she had some chance of success. Come to the house tomorrow at 4 in the afternoon, I told her. We'll talk about the family's future. Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd understand. When I hung up the phone, I smiled for the first time since Michael's death. Sarah had taken the bait exactly as I had predicted. The trap was ready to spring shut. On the morning of March 21st, I woke with an energy I hadn't felt since before Michael's illness. For the first time in months, I had a clear and defined purpose. While eating breakfast in the kitchen where Michael had enjoyed thousands of my meals, I dialed Daniel Ruiz's number. Daniel, I need you to execute the second phase of our investigation, I said without preamble. I want the exact names and addresses of all of Daniel Castillo's creditors. For what purpose, Mrs. Montoya? I'm going to buy their debts. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Are you sure? That could cost you a considerable amount. Daniel, I'm 72 years old and I've just lost the love of my life. Money is no longer my main priority. Justice? Yes. 3 hours later, Daniel gave me a detailed list of all of Daniel's creditors. The situation was even worse than we had initially discovered. In addition to the $300,000 in business debts and the 120,000 inches gambling loans, he had uncovered another $80,000 in personal debts to private lenders. My strategy was simple but devastatingly effective. Instead of waiting for Sarah to inherit to pay off her husband's debts, I would become the main creditor. I would financially control my daughter's destiny in the same way she had tried to control mine. My first stop was the offices of Garcia Industrial Supplies, the company Daniel owed the most money to, $110,000 for merchandise never paid for. Michael Garcia, the owner, was a man in his 60 seconds with the weary look of someone who deals with delinquent debtors. He received me with curiosity when I introduced myself as Daniel Castillo's mother-in-law. Mr. Garcia, I said directly, I'm here to propose a deal that will benefit us both. I want to buy the debt that Daniel Castillo has with your company. Garcia looked at me skeptically. Mrs. Montoya, that debt has been inactive for 6 months. Daniel promised to settle it when he received a family inheritance, but that inheritance will never come, I completed. I'm offering you $65,000 in cash today in exchange for you legally transferring that debt to my name. Garcia's eyes lit up. Recovering more than half of a debt he considered lost was an irresistible offer. And what do you gain from this? He asked with understandable curiosity. Let's just say I have my own methods for recovering money from my son-in-law. In less than 2 hours, I had signed the debt assignment contract. Michael Garcia left with a check for $65,000, and I officially became Daniel Castillo's main creditor. My second stop was the Chicago Express Loans Bank, an institution specializing in high-risk personal loans. The director, Daniel Herrera, was initially reluctant to discuss third-party debts. Mrs. Montoya, information about our clients is confidential. I showed him my ID along with my marriage certificate identifying me as Daniel's mother-in-law. I'm not looking for confidential information. I'm looking to buy the debt. Daniel reviewed Daniel's file on his computer, his frown deepening. Your son-in-law owes $80,000 with accumulated interest. We've been trying to contact him for 4 months without success. I'm offering you $50,000, immediate transfer, for the complete assignment of that debt. In cash? In cash. 20 minutes later, I had the second contract signed. For $115,000, I had acquired debts with a nominal value of $190,000. But my shrewdest move was yet to come. At 2 p.m., I met with Lorenzo, one of the private lenders on Daniel's list. Lorenzo operated from a discreet office in a working-class neighborhood, and his reputation in the world of fast loans was legendary. Mrs. Montoya, he greeted me with cautious respect. Daniel told me you wanted to talk about Daniel Castillo. Lorenzo, let's get straight to the point. Daniel owes you $45,000. I'm offering you 30,000 inches cash for the transfer of that debt. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, studying me with calculating eyes. Mrs. Montoya, with all due respect, Daniel is a lost cause. He has evaded our collection methods for months. I don't need extreme collection methods. I have more sophisticated methods. I showed him the contracts I had signed during the morning. Lorenzo whistled softly. Impressive. You're building a monopoly on your son-in-law's debts. Exactly. An hour later, I had the third contract. For a total of $145,000, I had acquired legal control of $315,000 of Daniel Castillo's debts. But my strategy wasn't limited to buying existing debts. I had also decided to create new financial pressures. At 3:30 in the afternoon, 30 minutes before my appointment with Sarah, I received confirmation from Daniel Torres. The commercial property had generated enormous interest in the real estate market. 3 potential buyers had made preliminary offers. The highest was for $230,000. Perfect. Sarah would arrive, expecting to negotiate a reconciliation that would give her access to my estate, but she would be met with a completely different reality. At 4 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Sarah with an expression that tried to combine sadness, regret, and hope. She wore a conservative black dress and carried fresh flowers, obviously calculated to evoke mourning and respect. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "I brought flowers for Dad's memorial." The flowers were white daisies, exactly the same ones I had taken to the funeral and that she had prevented me from leaving. "Come in, Sarah. We have a lot to talk about." She sat on the living room sofa where Michael and I used to watch TV together at night. She placed the flowers on the coffee table, an obviously rehearsed gesture. "Mom, I've had time to reflect on what happened at the funeral." She began with a tone that seemed genuinely repentant. "I was devastated by Dad's loss, and I think I made wrong decisions driven by grief." "Wrong decisions? The security guards were unnecessary. Dad would have wanted you to be there. I'm so sorry." I sat across from her, watching every micro-expression on her face. "Sarah, do you think an apology is enough?" "No, of course not. I want to do everything I can to repair our relationship. Dad would have wanted us to be united in these difficult times." "And what exactly do you propose?" Her eyes lit up slightly, believing she had found an opening. "Well, I thought we could organize Dad's financial affairs together. Make sure everything is in order, that there are no legal problems." There it was, the real reason for her visit. "Sarah," I said with a cold smile, "I have a surprise for you." Sarah looked at me with genuine expectation, clearly hoping my surprise was some kind of gift or gesture of reconciliation. Her body posture relaxed slightly, and for the first time since she had walked in, her smile seemed less forced. "A surprise, Mom? What kind?" I stood up and walked to Michael's desk, where I had carefully prepared a folder with all the documents I would need for this moment. Sarah followed me with her eyes, her curiosity mixed with a poorly disguised hope. "Sarah, over the past few days, I've had time to reflect on many things," I began as I opened the folder. "About family, about the future, about responsibilities." "That's very good, Mom. I think we all need time to process what has happened." "Exactly. And part of that process has been making important decisions about our family finances." Her eyes lit up almost imperceptibly. She had completely taken the bait. "For example," I continued, pulling out the first document, "I've been reviewing Daniel's financial situation." The change in her expression was instant. Hope turned to alarm, though she tried to maintain her composure. "Daniel's situation? I don't understand why." "Oh, but I think you understand perfectly." I showed her the debt assignment contract from Garcia Industrial Supplies. "You see, Sarah, I am now officially your husband's main creditor for the amount of $110,000. Sarah froze completely, her eyes fixed on the document in my hands. The color gradually drained from her face. "No, I don't understand what this means." "It means I bought the debt Daniel owed to Michael Garcia. Now, instead of owing him money, he owes it to me." I showed her the second contract. I also acquired his debt with Chicago Express Loans for an additional $80,000. Sarah brought a hand to her throat, an unconscious gesture she had made since childhood when she felt cornered. And finally, I pulled out the third document. "I bought his debts with private lenders for another $45,000. "Mom, what have you done?" "I've done exactly what you hoped I would do, my dear. I've used my money to solve your family's financial problems, just not in the way you had planned." Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "You can't do this. It's revenge." "No, Sarah. Revenge would have been calling the police when you tried to forge bank documents. Revenge would have been pressing criminal charges against you and Daniel for fraud and attempted swindling." Her legs seemed to give way, and she dropped back onto the sofa. "You knew about the documents?" "I know about everything, dear. I know about your visits to multiple banks with your father's forged signatures. I know about your consultations with law firms about inheritance procedures. I know about your plans to have me declared mentally incompetent if I lived too long after Michael's death." Sarah began to cry, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of despair at being completely exposed. "Mom, please. We were desperate. Daniel was going to lose everything. The children, I interrupted, will be perfectly taken care of. I have established an educational trust that will guarantee their college futures when they turn 25. But that trust is exclusively for them. Neither you nor Daniel will have access. And what about us? How are we supposed to live?" There was the question I had been waiting for. I sat down across from her, looking her directly in the eye. "Sarah, I'm going to make you an offer. One time only. You either accept it now, or you will never get another chance." She looked at me with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. "I can forgive all of Daniel's debts. The $315,000 he now owes me can disappear with my signature. And what do I have to do? Two very simple things. First, I want you to come with me tomorrow to the cemetery where your father is buried, and I want you to publicly apologize to him and to me in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation at the funeral." Sarah nodded quickly. "Yes, of course, I'll do that. Second condition, I want you to explain in front of those same people why you tried to steal your father's money before his body was even cold." "Mom, I never—" "Sarah," I said in a voice that brooked no argument. "I have recordings of phone conversations, copies of forged documents, bank testimonies, and WhatsApp messages where you and Daniel calculate how much money you would get from my death." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "We can't do that. It would be humiliating. More humiliating than preventing a widow from saying goodbye to her husband at his funeral. But, Mom, people will judge us. We'll lose our reputation." "Your reputation?" I stood up, walking to the window from where I could see the garden Michael had tended with so much love. "Sarah, your reputation was destroyed the moment you decided to kick me out of my own husband's funeral. Please, Mom, there has to be another way." I turned back to her. "There isn't. This is my final offer. Public humiliation in exchange for the forgiveness of debts, or complete financial ruin, and what happens after? If I accept, will we be a family again?" The question I had been both dreading and expecting. It was the moment of absolute truth. "No, Sarah, we will never be a family again. You killed our family the day you screamed at me that I should have died instead of your father. Then what's the point of apologizing? So you can live with the consequences of your actions without the added burden of financial ruin. So your children will have a mother who worked to redeem her mistakes, not a criminal who ran from them." Sarah cried silently for several minutes. Finally, she lifted her head and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "When?" "Tomorrow at 4 inches the afternoon, at Graceland Cemetery, by Michael's grave." She stood up slowly, as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. "And if I don't go? Then, tomorrow at 5 inches the afternoon, Daniel will receive legal notices demanding immediate payment of $315,000, and you will receive a criminal complaint for document forgery." Sarah walked toward the door without another word. Before she left, she turned to me one last time. "Will you ever truly forgive me?" "Forgiveness," I replied, "is something you have to earn. And after what you've done, I'm not sure you have enough life left to achieve it." The night of March 21st was the longest I had lived since Michael's death, not from insomnia or grief, but from the anticipation of what would happen the next day. I had set in motion a machine of justice that I could no longer stop, and I felt simultaneously powerful and melancholic. At 9 a.m., on March 22nd, my phone started ringing. It was Daniel Castillo. "Mrs. Montoya?" His voice sounded shaky. "Sarah told me what you talked about yesterday. Please, we need to find a solution." "Daniel, the solution is very simple. Your wife must comply with the conditions I set for her. But, Mrs. Montoya, you know that a public humiliation would completely destroy our social standing. I would lose my last clients. The children would be pointed at in school. You should have thought of that before you planned my death to pay your gambling debts." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. "How do you know about—" "Daniel, I know everything. Absolutely everything. Including your visits to illegal betting houses and your loans with predatory interest rates. Ma'am, I propose something different. I can sign a promissory note guaranteeing the payment of the entire debt in monthly installments, with interest if necessary." "With what money, Daniel? Your company is bankrupt. You have no stable job and you've just lost your last source of income." "I'll get a job. Sarah will work too. We'll do whatever it takes." His desperation was palpable, but I had already made my final decision. "Daniel, you have until 4 o'clock this afternoon to convince your wife to accept my terms. After that time, there will be no more negotiations." I hung up the phone and headed to Graceland Cemetery to prepare the stage for what would be the most important moment of my revenge. I arrived at the cemetery at 2 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the agreed-upon time. Michael's grave was still very new, with fresh flowers I had placed there early that morning. The white daisies he loved so much created a beautiful contrast with the black marble of the headstone. What Sarah didn't know was that I had invited specific witnesses to see her public apology. During the morning, I had contacted the most important people in our social circle. Linda Delgado, our neighbor, David Serrano, Michael's brother, Sarah Vega, Michael's younger sister, Father Antonio Jimenez, our parish priest, and Emily Castaneda, the bank manager. They had all agreed to come, moved by the curiosity of witnessing the resolution of the scandal that had shaken our community. At 3:45, my guests began to arrive. I had explained that Sarah had requested to make a public statement of apology and that I had agreed as part of a family reconciliation process. Linda Delgado was the first to arrive. "Emily, I'm glad to hear that Sarah is going to correct her behavior. What happened at the funeral was unacceptable." David Serrano arrived shortly after, accompanied by his wife, Rosa. "Emily, Michael would be proud to know you're giving Sarah a chance to redeem herself." Father Antonio arrived exactly at 4 o'clock. "Mrs. Montoya, I hope this meeting brings peace to your family." But 4 to 10 came with no sign of Sarah. Then 4:15. The guests began to murmur among themselves, some checking their watches with obvious discomfort. At 4:20, Emily Castaneda approached me. "Mrs. Montoya, are you sure your daughter confirmed she would be here?" "Completely sure," I replied, although inside I was beginning to suspect what had happened. At 4:25, my phone vibrated with a WhatsApp message from Sarah. "Mom, I can't do it. I'm sorry, but I can't humiliate myself publicly. I'd rather face the financial consequences." I read the message aloud so that everyone present could hear it. The reaction was immediate and forceful. "What shamelessness!" exclaimed Linda. "She doesn't even have the decency to show up to apologize." David Serrano shook his head sadly. "Michael is turning in his grave." Father Antonio placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Montoya, you did everything you could to give her a chance at redemption, but I wasn't surprised. In fact, I had expected exactly this reaction from Sarah. Her pride was stronger than her intelligence, and that was going to cost her everything. Friends," I said to those present, "I thank you deeply for coming. Your presence here shows the respect and love you felt for Michael. Unfortunately, my daughter has decided that her pride is worth more than her family." After seeing the guests off, I stood alone by Michael's grave. I took out my phone and dialed David Navarro's number. "David?" Sarah didn't show up. "Execute the final phase of the plan." "Are you sure, Emily? Once we set this in motion, there's no going back." "Completely sure." Sarah made her decision. "Now I'm making mine." "Very well. In 30 minutes, Daniel will receive the notification for immediate collection of the debts, and Sarah will receive the criminal complaint for document forgery." But I had one final surprise prepared that not even David fully knew about. "David, there's something else. Activate the final will as well." "The final will?" "Yes, the one we drafted in secret last week. Sarah is completely excluded from any inheritance. The assets will be distributed among the charitable foundation in Michael's memory, the educational trust for my grandchildren, and specific donations to the people who truly honored my husband's memory." "Emily, that means?" "It means Sarah will not receive a single dollar from my estate. Not now. Not when I die." That night, while I was having dinner alone in the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for our family, I received a desperate call from Sarah. "Mom, please! The lawyers are at my door. They say Daniel owes $315,000 immediately." "That's right, Sarah, and they're going to arrest me for document forgery." "That is also correct. Mom, please, I can still apologize publicly. I'll do anything." "No, dear, your chance was today at 4 in the afternoon. You wasted it, but we're family." "No," I replied with a calmness that surprised even myself. "The family ended when you screamed at me that I should have died instead of your father. What's left now are simply the consequences of your decisions." And I hung up the phone for the last time in my life. The next 6 months were a fascinating mix of personal tranquility and observing the consequences my decisions had unleashed in the lives of Sarah and Daniel. From the perspective of a woman who had lost her husband and discovered her daughter's betrayal, each development was both painful and satisfying. On March 23rd, just one day after the failed ultimatum at the cemetery, I received the first update from David Navarro on the progress of the legal proceedings. "Emily, the documents have been served. Daniel has 15 days to present a payment plan for the $315,000 or face the seizure of all his available assets." and the criminal complaint against Sarah has been formally filed with the circuit court. Forgery of bank documents is a serious crime that carries prison sentences of 1 to 3 years. During the first few weeks, I tried to stay away from any information about my daughter's situation, but living in the same neighborhood where I had built my life for decades made it impossible to completely avoid news of her progressive decline. Linda Delgado, our perpetually informed neighbor, unwittingly became my main source of information. "Emily," she told me one morning while watering her plants, "I saw Sarah at the supermarket yesterday. She looked haggard, buying only basic products. They say Daniel lost his office space because he couldn't pay the rent." 2 weeks later, Emily Castaneda informed me during a routine visit to the bank that Sarah had tried to apply for an emergency personal loan of $50,000. "Of course, Mrs. Montoya, we rejected the application immediately. Her financial situation is unsustainable, and besides, she appears in our databases as a person involved in attempted bank fraud." On May 10th, exactly 2 months after Michael's death, I received an unexpected visit that provided me with detailed information about Sarah's new reality. It was Aiden, my 6-year-old grandson. He came home after school with a serious expression that contrasted dramatically with the natural joy that had characterized his childhood. "Grandma, I need to talk to you," he said with a maturity that surprised me. "Of course, Aiden. What do you want to talk about?" "About Mom and Dad. About what's happening at home." I poured him a glass of milk, and we sat in the kitchen, where I had soothed so many childhood worries years before. "Grandma," Mom cries every night. "Dad disappears for days at a time looking for work, but he always comes back more depressed. We had to sell the car, cancel Sophie's extracurricular activities, and Mom is working cleaning offices in the evenings." My heart ached to hear the suffering in my grandson's voice, but I also felt a cold satisfaction knowing that my decisions were having exactly the impact I had calculated. "And what do you think about this whole situation, Aiden?" "Honestly, Grandma, I don't fully understand what happened between you and Mom, but I do know that Mom did something terrible at Grandpa Michael's funeral." "Has she explained to you what happened?" "She just says she made wrong decisions when she was very sad, and now the whole family is paying the consequences." Aiden paused, looking me directly in the eyes with an intensity that vividly reminded me of Michael when he had something important to say. "Grandma, Mom asked me to come and ask you if there's any chance you would reconsider your decision. She says she's willing to do anything to fix things. Anything." "Aiden," I explained to my grandson, in words appropriate for his age, what his mother had done, the forgery attempts, the humiliation at the funeral, the plans to have me declared mentally incompetent, and the conversations where she had calculated my death to benefit financially. Aiden listened in silence, his expression growing progressively more serious as he understood the magnitude of his mother's actions. "Is all that true, Grandma?" "All of it, Aiden. I have documents, recordings, testimonies. Your mother crossed lines that cannot be erased with apologies. But what's going to happen to us, to Sophie and me?" It was the question I had been waiting for and the reason I had established the educational trust. "Aiden, when you turn 25, you will have access to a fund that will guarantee your college education and give you a solid financial foundation to start your independent adult life. The same for Sophie. And Mom and Dad? They will have to learn to live with the consequences of their decisions." On July 15th, 4 months after Michael's funeral, I received a call from David Serrano, my husband's brother, Emily. I ran into Sarah at the mall. "She's working at a clothing store, earning minimum wage. She asked me if I could intercede with you to seek some kind of reconciliation." "And what did you tell her, David?" "I told her that Michael would never have forgiven what she did at the funeral, that some betrayals are unforgivable." "You did the right thing. But Emily, I'll also say that seeing her like that, so defeated, so different from the woman we knew, it's a little sad." "David, pity doesn't erase betrayal. And betrayal doesn't disappear just because the consequences are painful." On September 22nd, exactly 6 months after Michael's death, I had my last direct encounter with Sarah. I saw her at the farmer's market, buying cheap vegetables and obsessively comparing prices. She wore simple clothes, her hair pulled back practically, and an expression of permanent exhaustion that had replaced the arrogance I remembered from our last encounters. For a moment, our eyes met. She approached slowly, with uncertain steps. "Mom," she said in a broken voice, "can we talk for 5 minutes?" "Talk. I've learned my lesson, completely. I'm working 18 hours a day between the store and cleaning at night." Daniel finally found a job as a delivery driver. We're paying off our debts little by little. I'm glad to hear that. Is there any chance that one day you might forgive me? I looked at her for several seconds, remembering the woman who had thrown her own mother out of her father's funeral. Sarah, forgiveness requires trust, and trust, once broken in the way you broke it, cannot be repaired. But we're family. No, I replied with definitive finality. The family ended the day you decided your father was worth less than the money you hoped to inherit. And I walked away, leaving her standing among the cheap vegetables, finally understanding that some decisions have permanent and irreversible consequences. Today, March 15th, 2025, exactly 1 year after Michael's death, I find myself sitting in the same garden where he grew his white daisies, reflecting on the most transformative year of my life. At 73, I've learned that justice doesn't always arrive in the way we expect, but when it does, its impact is permanent and definitive. Over these 12 months, I have built a new existence that honors Michael's memory while protecting me from future family betrayals. My daily routine includes volunteer work at the Street Raphael Hospice, where I help other families navigate the most difficult moments of their lives. It's work that connects me with the deeper purpose Michael always taught me: to serve others with genuine compassion. The Michael Vega Morales Foundation, established with $500,000 from our family estate, has provided support to 200 families facing terminal illnesses. Every month, I receive letters of thanks from people who have found dignity and peace in their final moments, thanks to the resources my husband was denied because of our daughter's greed. The coastal condo that Michael and I had bought for our retirement has become a temporary retreat for recent widowers. Last summer, it hosted 8 elderly men who, like me, had lost their life partners and needed time to rebuild their identities. It was comforting to discover that my experience could help guide others through the same pain, but not all of it has been altruistic work. I have also kept a discreet watch over the evolution of Sarah and Daniel during this year of consequences. In July 2024, Daniel lost his job as a delivery driver after a minor accident damaged the company vehicle. For 3 months, the family survived solely on Sarah's salary from the clothing store and her nighttime income cleaning offices. In October, they had to move from their rented apartment to a smaller one in a less desirable neighborhood. Aiden, my grandson, has shown extraordinary maturity during this period of family hardship. He started working weekends at a supermarket to contribute to household expenses, while simultaneously maintaining excellent academic grades. He visits me every 2 weeks, and our conversations have allowed me to stay informed about the family situation without compromising my decision not to reconcile with Sarah. "Grandma," he told me during his last visit in February, "Mom has changed a lot this year. She's no longer the arrogant person I remember. She works constantly, never complains, and at night she studies accounting in an online course, hoping to get a better job." And what do you think about these changes, Aiden? I think they're genuine, but I also understand why you can't forgive her. What she did at Grandpa's funeral was unforgivable. The wisdom of my 7-year-old grandson constantly surprises me. He has intuitively understood that some transgressions transcend apologies and personal rehabilitation. Sophie, my 5-year-old granddaughter, has had a tougher year adapting to the new circumstances. During the first few months, she would send me text messages begging me to forgive her mother. But gradually, as she better understood the magnitude of Sarah's betrayal, her messages transformed into expressions of understanding and respect for my decision. Last month, I received a handwritten letter from Sophie that moved me deeply. "Dear Grandma, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened last year. At first, I was very angry with you because I thought you were being cruel to Mom. But now that I'm older and understand things better, I realize that Mom did something terrible that can't be erased. I want you to know that I respect you for defending Grandpa Michael's memory and that I understand why you can't forgive Mom. I love you very much, and I hope that one day we can have a relationship independent of this whole family problem." Sophie's letter confirmed that my decisions, though painful, had been educational not only for Sarah but for the entire family. As for my own process of grieving and rebuilding, this year has taught me that intelligent revenge can be therapeutic when executed with clear ethical principles. I didn't seek to destroy Sarah out of sadism, but to educate her on the permanent consequences of betraying family trust in the most vulnerable moments. The house where Michael and I built our memories has been partially transformed. His study became a library dedicated to books on palliative care and grief psychology, which I lend for free to families facing similar situations. His garden continues to flourish with the daisies he planted, and every morning I spend 30 minutes tending to them as a way of keeping his daily presence alive. In the afternoons, when the loneliness becomes more intense, I find solace in writing letters to Michael. I tell him about my work at the hospital, about the Foundation's progress, about our grandchildren's visits, and yes, also about Sarah's transformation. In these letters, I can be completely honest about my emotional process, without the pressure of maintaining the strength I show to the outside world. My dearest Michael, I wrote in my most recent letter, 365 days have passed since you closed your eyes forever, and every day confirms that I made the right decisions. Sarah is learning the value of honest work and humility, even though that education came too late to repair our family relationship. Our grandchildren are growing up with a mature understanding of the importance of respect and integrity, values you always championed. Reflecting on this extraordinary year, I realize that Michael's death, though devastating, freed me to become the most authentic version of myself. For 43 years of marriage, I was the devoted wife, the protective mother, the woman who kept the family peace at the cost of necessary confrontations. But Sarah's betrayal taught me that some situations require firm responses that transcend traditional family diplomacy. Today, as I look at the daisies that Michael planted, and that continue to bloom without his direct care, I understand that true love is sometimes best expressed through the protection of fundamental principles, even when that protection means severing ties that seemed unbreakable. Sarah had multiple opportunities to rectify her behavior, from the moment she began planning to benefit from her father's death to the final ultimatum at the cemetery. She consistently chose her pride and greed over family respect and basic human decency. The consequences she faces are not cruel punishments imposed by a vengeful mother, but natural and logical results of decisions she deliberately made. My role was simply to ensure that those consequences were proportional to the magnitude of her betrayal. As I write these final reflections, I feel a deep peace that I had not experienced since before Michael's illness. I have honored his memory, protected his legacy, educated our family on the importance of integrity, and found a new way to serve my community. Justice, when executed with patience and intelligence, seeks not revenge but balance. And after a year of observing that balance manifest in real life, I can say with certainty that some family betrayals deserve permanent and irreversible consequences. Michael, wherever you are, I hope you approve of the decisions I made to defend your dignity and the values we shared for nearly half a century of true love.